Blood trickled from Virginia Lewis's split lip as she staggered backward, her vision blurring from the force of Edmund Blackwell's blow. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Copper Creek, Texas, in the summer of 1875, illuminating the growing crowd of onlookers who did nothing but watch as the rancher's son towered over her trembling form. "You'll regret refusing me, girl," Edmund snarled, flexing his hand. "No one says no to a Blackwell in this town." Virginia wiped the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, her blue calico dress now stained with dirt from where she'd fallen. At 20 years old, she'd endured enough hardship to know when to fight and when to submit, but this time she couldn't yield. Not to him. Not to the spoiled son of the most powerful cattle baron in the county. "I said no, Mr. Blackwell, and I meant it," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "I don't care who your father is." Edmund's face contorted with rage. "You uppity little—" His hand raised again, and Virginia braced herself for another blow, but it never came. A tall figure stepped between them, moving so quickly Virginia barely registered his presence until she saw Edmund stumbling backward. The stranger stood with his back to her, shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest, dusty black hat shading his face from view. "That's enough," the man said, his voice low and steady. "Only a coward raises his hand to a woman." Edmund regained his footing, recognition dawning on his face. "Mitchell O'Malley. Should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. This ain't your concern, cowboy." "I'm making it my concern." Mitchell's stance didn't waver. Virginia could see the crowd growing restless. Everyone knew the Blackwells owned half the county and employed most of its residents. Nobody crossed them, nobody except, apparently, this stranger. Edmund glanced around, seemingly emboldened by the audience. "My father will hear about this. You'll regret. Your father should hear how his son behaves," Mitchell interrupted. "Now get before I forget my manners entirely." For a moment, Edmund looked ready to launch himself at Mitchell, but something in the cowboy's stance made him reconsider. With a final hateful glare at Virginia, he spat on the ground and stalked away. Only then did Mitchell turn to Virginia, and she got her first good look at him, whether tanned skin, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a storm-laden sky. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something arresting about his features that made her breath catch. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Virginia touched her swollen lip, embarrassment washing over her. "Yes, I thank you." The crowd began to disperse, but not before Virginia caught their whispers. She knew what they were thinking, that she'd brought this on herself by refusing Edmund, that she should have been grateful for his attention. The thought made her stomach turn. Mitchell surveyed her with concern. "You need tending to." "I'll be fine," Virginia insisted, though she swayed slightly as she tried to straighten. "I should get back to Virginia." A shrill voice cut through the air. Mrs. Patterson, her employer at the town's only hotel, pushed through the remaining onlookers. "What in heaven's name have you done now?" Virginia flinched. "Mrs. Patterson, I didn't—" "Causing trouble with the Blackwells." The older woman's face was pinched with anger and fear. "I can't have this sort of scandal associated with my establishment. I warned you about your willful ways." Mitchell stepped forward. "Madam, if I may, and who might you be?" Mrs. Patterson eyed him suspiciously. "Mitchell O'Malley, madam, just passing through. The young lady here was being harassed through no fault of her own." Mrs. Patterson's lips thinned to a line. "Be that as it may, Mr. O'Malley, I run a respectable business. I can't afford to antagonize the most influential family in the county." She turned to Virginia. "I'm afraid I must let you go, girl. Collect your things by sundown." Virginia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The hotel had been her only home since arriving in Copper Creek 6 months ago, fleeing from another situation too similar to this one. "Please, Mrs. Patterson," but the woman had already turned away, hurrying back toward the hotel as if to distance herself from the trouble. Virginia stood in the street, acutely aware of her predicament. No job, no home, and now the enmity of the Blackwells. Her meager savings wouldn't last a week. Mitchell watched the exchange with a deepening frown. That wasn't right. Virginia attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to Copper Creek, Mr. O'Malley. Justice is whatever the Blackwells say it is." A commotion at the end of the street drew their attention. Edmund had returned with 3 ranch hands, all looking in their direction with unmistakable purpose. Mitchell's expression hardened. "Miss, I think it's time we left." "We," Virginia echoed. Without answering, Mitchell strode to where a magnificent chestnut stallion was hitched outside the general store. In one fluid motion, he untied the horse and led it back to her. "I can't leave," Virginia protested weakly, even as the approaching men quickened their pace. "You can't stay," Mitchell countered. "Not unless you fancy another conversation with young Mr. Blackwell and his friends." Virginia looked around desperately. There was nowhere to run, no one who would stand against the Blackwells for her sake. "Trust me," Mitchell said, extending his hand. "Just until we get you somewhere safe." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, Virginia made her choice. She placed her hand in his, gasping slightly as he lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as his arms came around her to take the reins. The horse bolted forward just as Edmund and his men reached the spot where they had been standing. Virginia heard shouting behind them but couldn't make out the words over the thundering hoofbeats and the rush of wind in her ears. They galloped out of town, past the last weathered buildings and onto the open trail that wound through rolling hills dotted with mesquite and live oak. Only when Copper Creek was well behind them did Mitchell slow the horse to a more sustainable pace. "Where are we going?" Virginia finally asked, her voice small against the vast landscape surrounding them. Mitchell was silent for a moment. "I've got a small claim about a day's ride from here. It's not much, but you'll be safe there until we figure out your next steps." Virginia stiffened. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. O'Malley, and I certainly don't need a man to solve my problems." That drew a chuckle from him. "No offense, miss, but your problems back there looked pretty dire, and it's not charity, it's common decency." She couldn't argue with that. Instead, she asked, "Why help me? You don't even know me." Mitchell's voice grew somber. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be on the wrong side of men with too much power and too little conscience." They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the Texas landscape rolled by. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As dusk settled, Mitchell guided the horse off the main trail toward a cluster of trees beside a small creek. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, dismounting before helping Virginia down. Her legs felt unsteady after hours in the saddle. Mitchell efficiently set about making camp, unsaddling the horse and gathering wood for a fire. Virginia watched him work, feeling useless and out of place. "I can help," she offered, moving to assist him. He nodded toward his saddlebags. "There's some jerky and hardtack in there if you're hungry." Virginia retrieved the food while Mitchell got the fire going. As the flames cast dancing shadows around their small camp, she finally had a chance to truly look at her unexpected savior. Mitchell O'Malley was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard work rather than leisure. His clothes were well worn but clean, and though he carried a revolver at his hip, he didn't have the dangerous air of a gunslinger. There was a quietness about him that spoke of self-containment rather than menace. "How's your face?" he asked, catching her studying him. Virginia touched her cheek self-consciously. "It'll heal." "It shouldn't have happened at all." Mitchell passed her a canteen. "Drink. It's a long ride tomorrow." She accepted it gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "Have you had that claim long?" "About 2 years. It's nothing grand, just a cabin and some land. I raise a few horses." "You're not a cowboy?" she asked, remembering Edmund's taunt. A smile touched the corner of Mitchell's mouth. "I was. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for nearly a decade. Decided I wanted something that was mine, so I saved up and bought the claim when the previous owner moved on." Virginia nodded, understanding the desire for something to call one's own all too well. "I've been drifting since I was 16, she found herself confessing. "My parents died of fever and there wasn't much left after the debts were settled." Mitchell didn't offer pity, for which she was grateful. Instead, he asked, "What brought you to Copper Creek?" Virginia stared into the fire. "A chance for a fresh start. The hotel job came with a room and meals. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. And Blackwell's son," she tensed. "Edmund started coming around a few weeks ago. At first he was just another customer, but then he started waiting for me after my shifts, bringing gifts I couldn't accept. When I refused him, he became insistent. Today wasn't the first time he tried to force his attention on me, just the first time he did it in public." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Men like that think the world owes them whatever they want." "You stood up to him," Virginia noted. "Not many would. Maybe not in Copper Creek. But where I come from, a man earns respect. It's not handed to him because of his last name." They fell into companionable silence, the crackling fire and distant night sounds of the wilderness their only company. Virginia found herself oddly at ease despite the circumstances. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the quiet strength Mitchell exuded that made her feel safer than she had in months. As the fire burned low, Mitchell laid out a bedroll for her. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch. What about you?" "I'm used to sleeping under the stars," he said with a shrug. "The ground and I are old friends." Virginia settled onto the bedroll, acutely aware of this stranger's kindness. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. Not everyone would have done what you did today." Mitchell nodded once, his expression unreadable in the fading firelight. "Sleep well, Miss Lewis." As Virginia drifted toward sleep, she realized she hadn't told him her last name. But of course, in a small town like Copper Creek, he must have heard it from someone else. With that thought, she surrendered to exhaustion, the gentle sounds of Mitchell tending the horse lulling her into dreams. Morning came with birdsong and the scent of coffee brewing. Virginia awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until she saw Mitchell crouched by a small fire, his back to her as he poured coffee into a tin cup. "You're awake," he said without turning, as if he could sense her stirring. "Coffee." Virginia sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Yes, please." He handed her a cup, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot drink. "How far to your claim?" she asked, blowing on the steaming coffee. "We should reach it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace." Mitchell studied her face. "Your bruise is showing." Self-consciously, Virginia touched her cheek, wincing at the tender flesh. "It's nothing I haven't dealt with before." Something flashed in Mitchell's eyes, understanding or perhaps anger on her behalf. "No one should have to deal with being struck, Miss Lewis." Virginia sipped her coffee, avoiding his gaze. "The world isn't always what it should be, Mr. O'Malley." "Mitchell," he corrected. "If we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my given name." "Virginia," she offered in return, though she suspected he already knew it. They broke camp efficiently, and soon Virginia found herself once again seated before Mitchell on his horse, acutely aware of his solid presence at her back. The day warmed quickly, the Texas sun beating down as they traversed rolling grasslands interspersed with scrubby mesquite and the occasional copse of oak. Virginia learned that Mitchell wasn't much for idle chatter, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He pointed out landmarks, identifying plants she'd never noticed and explaining which ones could be used for medicine or food. He told her about the patterns of clouds that signaled coming weather and the habits of the animals whose tracks they passed. "You know a great deal about the land," Virginia observed after he showed her how to spot a water source by watching bird flight patterns. "Had good teachers," Mitchell replied. "Spent time with the Comanche as a boy. My father traded with them before the worst of the troubles. Later, I learned from Mexican vaqueros on the cattle drives." "Is that where you learned to stand up to bullies?" she asked, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "No, that came from watching my father die because he wouldn't bow to men who thought their money made them better than everyone else." Virginia turned slightly to look at him, surprised by the personal revelation. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," Mitchell said, his tone making it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat some of the provisions Mitchell carried. Virginia found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with quiet efficiency, the subtle lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship, the careful way he treated his horse. "What will you do after this?" Mitchell asked as they prepared to continue their journey. "After we reach my place," Virginia had been pondering the same question since they'd fled Copper Creek. "I'm not sure. Find work in another town, I suppose. Start over again. And if the Blackwells come looking." The thought sent a chill through her despite the heat of the day. They wouldn't bother tracking down one hotel maid. "Edmund Blackwell struck me as the type to hold a grudge," Mitchell observed, "and you wounded his pride publicly." Virginia knew he was right. The Blackwells were known for their long memories and longer reach. "Then I'll go farther, maybe north to Colorado or east to Louisiana." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully as he helped her back onto the horse. "There's no rush to decide. You're welcome to stay at my place until you figure things out." The offer surprised her. "You've already done more than enough, Mitchell. I couldn't impose further." "It's no imposition. The cabin's small but sound, and I've got a spare room I use for storage. It wouldn't take much to clear it out." Virginia was silent as they resumed their journey, considering his words. The thought of continuing to run, of starting over yet again in another strange town, exhausted her. But accepting Mitchell's charity felt like admitting defeat somehow. "I'd pay my way," she finally said. "I can cook and clean, tend a garden if you have one." Mitchell's voice carried a hint of amusement. "I won't turn down home-cooked meals. My skills are limited to what can be made in one pot over a fire." "Then we have an arrangement," Virginia said firmly. "But only until I save enough to move on." "Agreed." As the afternoon waned, the landscape began to change. They crossed a wider creek, the water cool and refreshing after hours in the saddle. Beyond it, the terrain grew more varied, with gentle hills covered in wildflowers and grasses that waved in the breeze. "Almost there," Mitchell said as they crested a rise. The valley below took Virginia's breath away. Nestled among oaks and cottonwoods sat a modest cabin, its weathered wood glowing amber in the late sunlight. A corral stood nearby, where several horses grazed peacefully. A small garden was visible to one side of the cabin, and a barn that had seen better days but still stood proud completed the scene. "It's beautiful," Virginia whispered. Genuinely moved by the tranquil setting, Mitchell's chest rumbled with a chuckle. It's humble, but it suits me. They descended into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, Virginia saw the details her distance view had missed. The carefully maintained path, the stacked firewood along one wall, the rocking chair on the small porch. This wasn't just a claim or a property, it was a home, lovingly tended. Mitchell dismounted first, then helped Virginia down. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly, her hands going to his shoulders to steady herself. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Mitchell stepped back first, clearing his throat. "Let me show you inside." The cabin was simple but tidy. The main room served as both kitchen and living area with a stone fireplace along one wall. A table and chairs sat near a window that caught the evening light, and a comfortable-looking armchair was positioned by the hearth. 2 doors led off the main room, one, Mitchell explained, to his bedroom, and the other to what would be hers. "It needs clearing out," he said, opening the door to reveal a space filled with crates and tools. "But the bed frame's already in there. We just need to bring in the mattress from the loft." "It's perfect," Virginia assured him, already envisioning how the room would look once organized. "I can start clearing it tomorrow." "First, let's get some food in you," Mitchell said. "You must be starved." Virginia realized she was indeed ravenously hungry. While Mitchell tended to his horse, she explored the kitchen area, finding it basic but serviceable. By the time he returned, she had taken stock of his provisions. "You weren't joking about your limited cooking," she observed with a small smile. "Do you survive on beans and salt pork alone?" Mitchell rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost sheepish. "There's flour for biscuits too. And coffee. I hunt when meat gets low." "Well, tomorrow I'll see what your garden offers, but tonight I can at least make these beans taste like something other than sadness." That drew a genuine laugh from Mitchell, a rich sound that transformed his face and made Virginia's heart skip unexpectedly. Together, they prepared a simple meal, moving around each other in the small kitchen space with surprising ease. As darkness fell, they ate by lamplight, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. "How long were you in Copper Creek?" Mitchell asked as they finished their meal. "About 6 months," Virginia replied, pushing her empty plate away. "It wasn't my first choice, but the stage broke down there on my way to San Antonio, and Mrs. Patterson needed help at the hotel. And before that," Virginia traced the grain of the wooden table with her fingertip, "Dallas for a while, then a small town called Mercer's Crossing until circumstances made it clear I should move on." Mitchell didn't press, but his steady gaze invited confidence. "It was similar to what happened with Edmund," Virginia admitted. "The son of my employer decided I should be grateful for his attention. When I wasn't, he tried to take what I wouldn't give." Her voice hardened. "I broke his nose with a cast iron skillet and left that night." "Good for you," Mitchell said with unexpected fierceness. "Though I'm sorry you had to defend yourself at all." Virginia studied him across the table. "You're different from most men I've known." "How so?" "You don't seem to think a woman is property to be claimed, for one thing." Mitchell's expression darkened. "I've seen what happens when people are treated as property. It's not something I could ever abide." There was history there, Virginia sensed, but didn't feel it was her place to probe. Instead, she asked, "Have you always been on your own here, since I bought the place?" Mitchell confirmed. "Had a partner for the first year, an old trail buddy, but he got gold fever and headed to Colorado. Haven't heard from him since." "Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before Virginia could consider its impertinence. Mitchell's eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. "Yes, but better lonely than in bad company." Virginia nodded, understanding completely. I've found the same to be true. Later, after Mitchell helped her set up a temporary bed in the main room, insisting she take it while he slept in the barn until they could clear the second bedroom. Virginia lay awake listening to the night sounds of this new place, so different from the bustling hotel in Copper Creek. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken in just one day. Yesterday, she'd been Virginia Lewis, hotel maid with few prospects. Today she was, what, a fugitive, a guest, a woman adrift yet again. One thing was certain. Mitchell O'Malley was unlike anyone she'd encountered in her troubled journey. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, Virginia fell asleep without fear of what the morning might bring. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Virginia and Mitchell established a routine. Mornings began early, with Mitchell tending to his horses while Virginia prepared breakfast. Then they worked together to clear the second bedroom, carrying crates to the barn and organizing tools that had been haphazardly stored. "What's in all these?" Virginia asked on the second day, gesturing to several wooden boxes they'd moved. "Books mostly," Mitchell answered, surprising her. "My father was an educated man, left me his collection when he died." Virginia opened one crate to find dozens of volumes: history, philosophy, novels, and poetry. "You've read all these, most of them. Winter nights get long out here." She looked at him with new appreciation. "You're full of surprises, Mitchell O'Malley." By the third day, the room was clear enough for the bed to be properly set up. Mitchell brought in the mattress from the loft, and together they made it with fresh linens he'd purchased but never used. "There," Mitchell said as they stepped back to survey their work. "Your own space." Virginia felt an unexpected surge of emotion. It had been years since she'd had a room that wasn't rented or provided as part of employment, a space that was, in some small way, hers. "Thank you," she said softly. Mitchell nodded once, seeming to understand what the simple room meant to her. "I'll leave you to get settled in. Got to check on the new foal." Virginia spent the afternoon organizing her few belongings and exploring the cabin more thoroughly in Mitchell's absence. She discovered little touches that spoke of the man: a carved wooden horse on the mantel, a collection of arrowheads arranged on a shelf, carefully mended clothes in the chest of drawers in his room, which she had opened without thinking, then closed quickly, embarrassed by her nosiness. In the kitchen, she took inventory of what they had and what they needed. Mitchell's garden yielded carrots, potatoes, and green beans, but they were low on flour and sugar. When Mitchell returned from the corral, she presented him with a list. "I can make do with what we have for now," she explained, "but next time you go to town, these would be helpful." Mitchell read the list, nodding. "I usually ride into Willow Springs every couple of weeks for supplies. It's a day's ride each way. I was planning to go tomorrow, actually." Virginia felt a stab of anxiety at the thought of being left alone. "Will you be gone overnight?" "No choice. It's too far to make the round trip in a day." Mitchell must have noticed her unease. "The Blackwells have no reach in Willow Springs, different county, different cattle barons. And nobody knows you're here." "Of course," Virginia said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Mitchell broke a comfortable silence. "I was thinking you might want to come with me tomorrow." "To Willow Springs?" Virginia turned to him, surprised. "Really? You'll need things of your own, clothes and such, and it might do you good to see more than just this cabin and valley." The thought of venturing out was both appealing and frightening. "What if someone recognizes me?" Willow Springs is nearly 50 miles from Copper Creek. Different people, different gossip. Mitchell's expression grew serious. "But if you're not comfortable, there's no rush. The offer stands whenever you're ready." Virginia considered it, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The idea of new clothes was tempting. She had only what she'd been wearing when they fled, and a spare dress Mitchell had found in one of the crates, left by some previous visitor. "I'll come," she decided. "But I don't have money for new things." "Consider it an advance on your services," Mitchell said easily. "You've already improved my meals tenfold and organized my home better than I ever could." Virginia wanted to object but recognized the practicality of the arrangement. "Very well. But I'll keep track and work it off properly." Mitchell smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "I don't doubt it." They set out for Willow Springs at dawn the next morning, riding double on Mitchell's chestnut stallion. Virginia had grown accustomed to the arrangement over the past days, no longer feeling awkward about the proximity it required. In fact, she found herself appreciating the solid presence of Mitchell at her back, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. The journey took them through varied terrain, grassy plains giving way to gentle hills dotted with oak and mesquite, then a rocky stretch that followed a winding creek. Mitchell pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region, and Virginia found herself relaxing into the adventure. Willow Springs proved to be larger than Copper Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses and a sense of bustle that spoke of prosperity. As they rode into town, Virginia felt eyes turn their way not with suspicion, but with the natural curiosity small towns showed toward visitors. Mitchell helped her dismount in front of a general store, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "We'll start here for supplies, then find you a dressmaker." The store owner greeted Mitchell by name, confirming his status as a regular customer. While Mitchell gathered the items on their list, Virginia explored the shelves, touching fabrics and examining household goods with interest. "Your wife has good taste," the shopkeeper remarked to Mitchell as they approached the counter with their selections. Virginia froze, waiting for Mitchell to correct the assumption, but he merely smiled and said, "She does at that." Outside, Virginia raised an eyebrow at him. "Wife?" Mitchell looked slightly embarrassed. Simpler than explaining. A woman traveling alone with a man draws attention. A married couple doesn't. Virginia couldn't argue with the logic, though the pretense made her cheeks warm. "You could have warned me." "Would you have minded?" Mitchell asked, studying her face. "No," Virginia admitted after a moment. "I suppose not." They continued their shopping, stopping at a dressmaker's shop where Mitchell arranged for 2 new dresses and necessary undergarments. The seamstress, Mrs. Donovan, took Virginia's measurements with professional efficiency. "Your husband said you lost your luggage in an accident, Mrs. Donovan said conversationally as she worked. "Such a shame, but these should be ready by this afternoon." Virginia glanced at Mitchell, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug. "Yes, very unfortunate. Thank you for accommodating us so quickly." With shopping completed, they took a room at the town's small hotel, a single room with 2 beds, maintaining their married pretense. Virginia felt oddly shy as Mitchell set their purchases inside and closed the door. "I'll sleep in the chair," he said immediately, seeming to sense her discomfort. "Don't be ridiculous," Virginia replied. "The beds are perfectly adequate for both of us. We're adults." Mitchell nodded, though she noticed him avoiding her gaze. "I thought we might have supper at the restaurant across the street. They serve a decent meal." "I'd like that," Virginia said, surprised by how much she meant it. After days of their own company, the prospect of a proper restaurant meal in town felt like a special occasion. The restaurant was busy but not crowded, with checkered tablecloths and lanterns providing a warm atmosphere. They were seated at a small table near a window, and Virginia found herself enjoying the novel experience of being served instead of doing the serving. "This feels strange," she confessed as they waited for their food. "Pretending to be married, sitting in a restaurant like we belong here." "Why wouldn't you belong?" Mitchell asked. Virginia traced the rim of her water glass. "I've spent so long just trying to survive, moving from place to place. I've never really belonged anywhere." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "I know that feeling. Spent most of my life that way before I found my place in the valley." Their meal arrived, hearty portions of roast beef with vegetables and fresh bread. As they ate, Virginia found herself studying the other patrons' families, couples, businessmen, all going about their normal lives, untouched by the drama that had forced her to flee Copper Creek. "What would it be like," she mused softly, "to live without looking over your shoulder?" Mitchell's expression grew somber. "It's possible, Virginia. Not always easy, but possible." After supper, they walked through town, maintaining their charade with casual touches, Mitchell's hand at the small of her back, Virginia's arm linked through his. The ease with which they fell into these gestures surprised her. They collected her finished dresses from Mrs. Donovan, who praised Mitchell for his generosity. "Not many husbands would be so thoughtful after such a mishap," she said with approval. That night in their hotel room, an awkward silence fell as they prepared for bed. Virginia changed into a new nightgown behind a privacy screen while Mitchell made a show of studying the ceiling. "Mitchell," Virginia said as she emerged, braiding her hair for sleep, "thank you for today." "For everything, really." He looked at her then, his expression unguarded in the lamplight. "You don't need to thank me." "I do," she insisted. "You've risked a great deal for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Mitchell said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither seemed ready to examine. Virginia slipped into her bed while Mitchell extinguished the lamp, leaving only moonlight filtering through the curtains. "Good night, Virginia," he said from the darkness of his own bed. "Good night, Mitchell," she replied, listening to his breathing gradually slow and deepen as he fell asleep. Virginia lay awake longer, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken and the man who had caused that turn. Mitchell O'Malley was becoming something more than a rescuer or a temporary employer. He was becoming a friend, perhaps the first true friend she'd had in years. The thought brought both comfort and a flutter of anxiety. Friends could be lost. Friends could disappoint. But as sleep finally claimed her, Virginia found herself hoping that whatever was growing between them might prove more durable than her past connections. The return journey to Mitchell's Valley the next day had a different quality, more relaxed, with an ease born of shared experiences. Virginia wore one of her new dresses, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes, and caught Mitchell looking at her more than once with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What?" she finally asked as they stopped to rest the horse near a bubbling stream. Mitchell seemed embarrassed to be caught staring. "Nothing. The dress suits you, that's all." Virginia smoothed the fabric self-consciously. "It's a luxury to have something new." "You deserve nice things," Mitchell said simply, then busied himself with watering the horse. They reached the cabin by late afternoon, both tired but content. The small valley welcomed them like an old friend, golden in the slanting sunlight. As Mitchell helped Virginia down from the horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist, she felt a curious sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with the cabin itself. The days that followed established a routine that felt increasingly natural. Mornings began with shared coffee and breakfast, then diverged as Mitchell tended to his horses and small herd of cattle while Virginia maintained the garden and cabin. They came together again for the midday meal, sometimes eaten quickly between tasks, other times lingering at the table in conversation. Virginia discovered that Mitchell was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, considering her words rather than merely waiting for his turn to talk. It was a novel experience for her, and she found herself sharing thoughts she'd long kept private. "My father wanted me to be educated," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon. "He taught me himself when the local school proved inadequate. People thought it odd educating a girl beyond basic reading and figures." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Mitchell remarked. Virginia smiled sadly. "He was. He believed women's minds were as capable as men's. The world moves forward on the thoughts of all people, not just half of them," he used to say. "I'd have liked to meet him," Mitchell said. The storm they'd been watching arrived with dramatic fury, driving them inside with pelting rain and booming thunder. Virginia found herself standing at the window, mesmerized by nature's display. "I've always loved storms," she admitted as Mitchell stoked the fire. "The power of them, the way they clear the air afterward." Mitchell joined her at the window. "My mother feared them. She'd hide in the root cellar at the first rumble of thunder. And you, I'm with you. There's something honest about a storm, no pretense, just pure elemental force." A particularly close lightning strike illuminated the valley, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the cabin. Virginia jumped despite herself, and Mitchell's hand found her shoulder, steadying. "We're safe here," he assured her. "Cabins weathered worse." His proximity in the dim light, the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress, the intimate rumble of his voice all combined to create a moment charged with more than just the electricity in the air. Virginia turned slightly, looking up to find Mitchell watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might close the distance between them. Then another thunderclap broke the spell, and Mitchell stepped back, clearing his throat. "How about some coffee?" he suggested, moving toward the kitchen area. "Nights like this call for something warm." Virginia nodded, feeling oddly disappointed. Yes, coffee would be nice. As the storm raged outside, they sat before the fire with steaming cups, the conversation returning to safer topics: plans for expanding the garden, a loose board on the porch that needed fixing, the progress of the new foal in the corral. Yet something had shifted between them, some invisible boundary crossed, or at least acknowledged. Virginia felt it in the way Mitchell's eyes lingered when he thought she wasn't looking, in the careful distance he now maintained when they moved around each other in the cabin. She wasn't sure what to make of it, or of her own confused feelings. Mitchell had been her rescuer, then her host, then her friend. What more could he become? What more did she want him to become? The questions followed Virginia to bed that night, keeping her awake long after the storm had passed, and silence had returned to the valley. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their arrangement. Virginia expanded the garden, adding herbs and flowers among the vegetables. Mitchell built additional shelves in the cabin to properly display his books rather than keeping them in crates. Together, they repaired the sagging front steps and gave the porch a fresh coat of whitewash. Each small improvement made the cabin feel more like a home, their home, though neither spoke this thought aloud. The pretense of a temporary arrangement remained, even as Virginia's planned departure receded into an undefined future. Their closest neighbors, the Hendersons, lived 5 miles away and came to visit one Sunday, bringing fresh baked pie and curiosity about Mitchell's new companion. Sarah Henderson, a motherly woman in her 40s, embraced Virginia warmly. "Mitchell's been alone too long," she declared as the men stepped outside to examine a new plow Thomas Henderson had purchased. "It's good to see him with someone." "Oh, we're not," Virginia began, then hesitated. What exactly were they? I'm just staying for a while. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe this for a moment. Of course, dear. Just staying. That's why the garden's doubled in size and there are curtains on the windows. Virginia blushed. The curtains had been her addition, sewn from fabric purchased on their second trip to Willow Springs. The cabin needed some touches, she said defensively. Indeed it did, Sarah agreed, and so did its owner. She patted Virginia's hand. I won't pry, but I'll say this: I've known Mitchell O'Malley for 2 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. The observation stayed with Virginia long after the Hendersons had departed. That night, as she and Mitchell sat at the table playing a game of checkers, she found herself studying him more carefully. The lamplight caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the laugh lines around his eyes, the strong hands that moved the pieces with careful precision. You're staring, Mitchell noted without looking up from the board. Virginia didn't bother denying it. Sarah Henderson said something interesting today. Oh, Mitchell moved his checker, capturing one of hers. She seems to think there's something between us, something more than friendship. Mitchell's hand stilled on the board. He looked up, his expression guarded. Sarah likes to matchmake, has ever since we've known her. Is that all it is? Matchmaking? Virginia pressed, heart racing at her own boldness. The question hung between them, demanding an answer neither seemed prepared to give. Mitchell stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace where he prodded the embers unnecessarily. Virginia, he finally said, his back to her, you came here seeking safety, not complications. Is that what I would be, a complication? She couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. Mitchell turned, his expression torn. No, God, no, you've become essential somehow. That's what frightens me. The admission, raw and honest, stole Virginia's breath. I frighten you. What I feel for you does. Mitchell ran a hand through his hair. I didn't expect this, didn't look for it. Virginia stood, moving to stand before him. Neither did I. You deserve better than a worn-out cowboy with nothing but a small claim and a few horses to his name, Mitchell said softly. Shouldn't I be the judge of what I deserve? Virginia countered, finding courage in his vulnerability. I've spent my life running from men who wanted to possess me, not love me. You're the first who's ever seen me, truly seen me as a person with my own mind and heart. Mitchell's hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite touching it. I see you, he confirmed, voice rough with emotion. Too clearly, perhaps. Virginia closed the distance between them, pressing her cheek into his palm. Then be brave enough to act on what you see. For a moment, Mitchell remained frozen, his eyes searching hers. Then, with exquisite gentleness, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Virginia answered by sliding her hands to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Mitchell rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the storm, he confessed. Virginia smiled. I've wanted you to since then as well. Mitchell brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression growing serious. I don't want to rush you, Virginia. Whatever this is between us, it should unfold in its own time. The consideration in his words, so different from the entitled expectations she'd encountered from other men, made Virginia love him a little more. Yes, love, she could admit that to herself now, though it still felt too fragile to speak aloud. We have time, she agreed. I'm not going anywhere. The admission felt monumental, a commitment where before there had been only uncertainty. Mitchell's smile told her he understood its significance. That night, they parted at their respective bedroom doors with a lingering kiss that held promise rather than demand. As Virginia prepared for bed, She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. For the first time, she was exactly where she wanted to be, with someone who valued her for herself. The change in their relationship brought subtle adjustments to their daily life. Casual touches became more frequent. Mitchell's hand at the small of her back as they moved around the kitchen, Virginia's fingers brushing his when passing tools in the garden, shoulders touching as they sat side by side on the porch in the evenings. They spoke more openly of the future now, making plans that assumed Virginia's continued presence. Mitchell talked of expanding the horse breeding operation, perhaps building a proper stable to replace the aging barn. Virginia discussed improvements to the garden and her desire to start a small flock of chickens. "I've been thinking," Mitchell said one evening as they walked along the creek that bordered his property, hands intertwined. "The south pasture would make good wheat land. We could grow enough for our own flour, maybe even sell some in town." "Our own flour," Virginia repeated, noting the casual way he included her in the future of the land. Mitchell squeezed her hand. "Too presumptuous." "No," she assured him. "Just new. I've never had a future to plan before, only escape routes." Mitchell stopped, turning to face her. "I want to give you that, Virginia, a future without fear." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart swell. "You already have." As summer gave way to early autumn, bringing cooler nights and subtle changes to the landscape, their contentment seemed complete. Virginia had begun making preserves from the garden harvest, filling the cabin with the sweet scent of simmering fruit. Mitchell had successfully sold 2 of his yearlings in Willow Springs, returning with gifts for Virginia: a silver hairbrush, a book of poetry, and fabric for a winter dress. They were celebrating these small victories with a special dinner when a knock at the door shattered their peaceful evening. Mitchell frowned, setting down his fork. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. "Stay here," he said quietly, moving to the door with a caution that reminded Virginia of how tenuous security could be on the frontier. He opened the door to reveal a young man in dusty trail clothes, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, sir," the visitor said. "Name's Charlie Webb. I'm looking for work and heard you might be hiring." Mitchell relaxed slightly. "Who sent you my way?" "Mr. Henderson. Met him in Willow Springs yesterday. He said you were expanding your horse operation and might need an extra hand." Mitchell glanced back at Virginia, who nodded encouragingly. They had indeed discussed hiring help as the breeding business grew. "Come in, Mr. Webb," Mitchell said, stepping aside. "We were just having supper." "Have you eaten?" Charlie entered, nodding politely to Virginia. "No, sir, not since morning. Much obliged for the invitation." Virginia quickly set another place while Mitchell pulled up a chair. As they resumed their meal, Charlie proved to be a pleasant dinner companion, respectful, articulate, and knowledgeable about horses. He was no more than 22, with an open face and ready smile that put Virginia at ease. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Webb?" she asked as she served him a second helping of stew. "West Texas, madam. My family had a small spread near Abilene, but drought took it 3 years ago. Been working odd jobs since then, trying to save enough to start over." Mitchell asked practical questions about Charlie's experience with horses, his willingness to take on various tasks, and his expectations regarding pay and accommodations. By the end of the meal, it was clear Charlie would be a valuable addition to their operation. "I can offer room and board plus $15 a month to start," Mitchell said. "There's a small bunkhouse behind the barn, needs some fixing up, but it's sound." Charlie's face lit up. "That's more than fair, Mr. O'Malley. I'm happy to help with the repairs." "Good. You can start tomorrow." Mitchell stood, signaling the end of business discussion. "Virginia, is there coffee to go with that pie I smell?" As Virginia served dessert, she noticed Charlie studying them with curious eyes. "Forgive my asking, madam," he said hesitantly, "but are you Mr. O'Malley's wife?" Mr. Henderson wasn't clear on that point. Virginia and Mitchell exchanged glances, an entire conversation passing between them in that look. "Not yet," Mitchell answered, his eyes never leaving Virginia's face. "But I hope to remedy that soon." The simple declaration made Virginia's heart skip. They had spoken of feelings, of shared futures, but never so explicitly of marriage. The prospect made her both terrified and exhilarated. Later, after Charlie had been settled in the bunkhouse with fresh bedding and promises of a full tour in the morning, Virginia and Mitchell stood alone in the kitchen, the tension of unspoken words between them. "Did you mean it?" Virginia finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About marriage," Mitchell took her hands in his. "Every word. I know it hasn't been long, 3 months next week," Virginia supplied. 3 months, Mitchell echoed with a small smile. "Long enough to know my own heart, if not long enough by society's standards." He paused, studying her face. "I love you, Virginia Lewis. I think I have since that day in Copper Creek when you stood your ground against Edmund Blackwell, despite your split lip and frightened eyes." Virginia blinked back unexpected tears. "I never thought I would trust a man enough to love him, but you've shown me what real strength looks like. Not domination but protection, not possession but partnership." Mitchell's hands tightened on hers. "Is that a yes? Are you asking?" Virginia challenged, a smile tugging at her lips. Mitchell laughed softly, then sobered. With deliberate movements, he knelt before her, still holding her hands. "Virginia Lewis, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this cabin truly a home and this land truly a future?" Virginia's heart felt too full for her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Mitchell O'Malley, I will marry you." Mitchell rose, gathering her into an embrace that felt like a promise. When he kissed her, Virginia tasted joy pure and unalloyed, a sensation she'd nearly forgotten could exist in this hard world. They agreed to marry in 2 weeks' time, with the Hendersons and the minister from Willow Springs as witnesses. The days that followed were filled with preparations and a happiness that seemed to transform the valley itself. Charlie proved to be an excellent worker, tackling the bunkhouse repairs and stable chores with enthusiasm that freed Mitchell to focus on wedding arrangements. Virginia sewed a new dress of cream-colored fabric with lace trim purchased on a special trip to Willow Springs. Sarah Henderson brought over her mother's wedding veil, insisting Virginia borrow it for the ceremony. "It brought me luck," Sarah said as she helped Virginia try it on. 23 years with Thomas and still happy." The day before the wedding, Mitchell rode into town one final time for supplies and to collect the minister. Virginia spent the day baking and preparing the cabin for their small celebration, her heart light with anticipation. When she heard hoofbeats approaching in the late afternoon, she went to the porch expecting to see Mitchell and the minister. Instead, she found Charlie riding in at a gallop, his expression grim. "What is it?" Virginia asked, instantly alert. "Where's Mitchell?" Charlie dismounted quickly. "Trouble in town, Miss Virginia. I rode ahead to warn you." Virginia's hand went to her throat. "Is Mitchell hurt?" "No, madam, he's fine. He sent me to get you somewhere safe." Charlie glanced nervously toward the trail. "The Blackwells are here." The name hit Virginia like a physical blow. "Here? How? Seems they've been looking for you all this time. Someone from Copper Creek was in Willow Springs, recognized you from your last visit. Word got back to the Blackwells." Virginia sank onto the porch step, her knees suddenly weak. "And Mitchell?" "He's trying to reason with them, but that Edmund fella brought half a dozen men. They're demanding he turn you over." Charlie's young face was etched with concern. He said to tell you to ride for the Hendersons' place while he handles this. The thought of running while Mitchell faced danger on her behalf was unbearable. No, I won't leave him to deal with this alone. Miss Virginia, he was very clear, I don't care. Virginia stood, decision made. The Blackwells want me, not Mitchell. This ends today. At least let me ride with you, Charlie pleaded. Mr. O'Malley would have my hide if I let you go alone. Virginia nodded, grateful for the young man's loyalty. Let me change first. I won't face them in my apron. Minutes later, wearing her sturdiest riding clothes and with her hair braided firmly back, Virginia mounted the gentle mare Mitchell had been training for her. With Charlie beside her, they set off for Willow Springs at a fast trot. What exactly did Mitchell say? Virginia asked as they rode. Charlie looked uncomfortable. That he'd handle it, that the Blackwells had no right to come making demands on his land. And how did they respond? That Edmund fella said you belonged to him, that you'd made a promise. Charlie's disgust was evident. Mr. O'Malley told him no woman belonged to any man, and that the only promises that mattered were those freely given. Pride swelled in Virginia's chest, even as fear constricted it. Mitchell was standing for principles that could get him killed in a land where might often determined right. They reached the outskirts of Willow Springs as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Virginia spotted the confrontation immediately, a cluster of mounted men outside the general store, with Mitchell standing alone on the boardwalk, his stance defiant. Virginia slowed her horse, assessing the situation. She recognized Edmund Blackwell immediately, his arrogant posture unchanged in the months since their last encounter. The men with him wore the Blackwell Ranch brand on their vests, hired guns brought to intimidate. "Stay back," Virginia instructed Charlie, "but be ready to ride for the sheriff if this goes badly." Before the young man could object, Virginia urged her mare forward, approaching the standoff with a calm she didn't feel. The group turned at the sound of hoofbeats, and Virginia saw Mitchell's face transform from determined to dismayed. "Virginia, no," he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "This is my fight, Mitchell. It always was." Edmund Blackwell's lips curled into an unpleasant smile. "Well, well." The runaway bride herself. "You've led us quite a chase, Virginia." Virginia stopped her horse a safe distance from the group, keeping her voice steady. "I was never your bride, Edmund, not even close." "We had an understanding," Edmund insisted, his tone dangerously soft. "The only understanding was in your mind," Virginia replied. "I told you no clearly and repeatedly. You responded with violence." Mitchell moved to stand near her horse, his presence reassuring. "Mr. Blackwell, you and your men are not welcome here. I suggest you return to Copper Creek and forget this foolishness." Edmund's face darkened. "This woman humiliated me in front of my entire town. No one does that to a Blackwell without consequences." "Is that what this is about?" Virginia asked, a strange calm settling over her. "Your pride." "You're mine," Edmund stated flatly. "I claimed you first." Virginia felt Mitchell tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "I am not property to be claimed, Edmund. I'm a person who makes her own choices, and I choose Mitchell O'Malley." The declaration hung in the air, simple and profound. Around them, Virginia became aware of townspeople gathering witnesses to this confrontation between power and principle. Edmund's hand moved to his gun belt. "I didn't ride all this way to leave empty-handed." "You're coming with me, Virginia, one way or another." Mitchell stepped forward, placing himself between Virginia and Edmund. "The lady has spoken. Leave now while you still can." For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Virginia held her breath, terrified of what might unfold. Then an authoritative voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Blackwell. The town sheriff approached, rifle in hand, with several deputies flanking him. "We don't take kindly to outsiders bringing trouble to Willow Springs." Edmund's expression was murderous. "This isn't your concern, Sheriff. When armed men threaten my townspeople, it becomes my concern," the sheriff replied evenly. "Miss Lewis and Mr. O'Malley are respected citizens here. You and your men need to move along." Edmund looked around, evidently calculating his odds. The gathering crowd clearly favored the local couple, and the sheriff's deputies had their hands on their weapons. "This isn't over," Edmund finally said, glaring at Virginia. Your father sent me to end this nonsense," a new voice interrupted. A distinguished older man rode into the circle, his resemblance to Edmund unmistakable despite his more dignified bearing. "You've embarrassed the family enough, Edmund." Virginia recognized him immediately. Horace Blackwell, the patriarch of the clan and one of the most powerful men in 3 counties. "Father," Edmund began, but the older man silenced him with a gesture. "Miss Lewis," Horace Blackwell said, turning to Virginia. "My son's behavior has been inexcusable. I came to offer the Blackwell family's apologies and to assure you there will be no further harassment." The unexpected apology left Virginia momentarily speechless. Mitchell stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Mr. Blackwell," Mitchell acknowledged cautiously, "that's appreciated, but what guarantees do we have?" The older man's expression was grave. "My word. Edmund will be leaving for our holdings in California tomorrow. His temperament is better suited to a fresh start far from here." Edmund looked stricken. "Father, you can't enough," Horace Blackwell snapped. "You've jeopardized our standing and our business with this foolish vendetta. It ends today." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Edmund's shoulders slumped in defeat, his face a mask of resentment, but his fight clearly gone. Horace Blackwell tipped his hat to Virginia. "Miss Lewis, I wish you and Mr. O'Malley well. You won't be troubled by the Blackwell family again." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, his son and the hired guns following reluctantly behind. The gathered townspeople began to disperse, murmuring about the dramatic confrontation they'd witnessed. Virginia slid from her horse into Mitchell's waiting arms, the adrenaline that had sustained her suddenly draining away. "Is it really over?" she whispered against his chest. Mitchell held her tightly. "I believe it is. Horace Blackwell is many things, but he's known for keeping his word. His business depends on it." The sheriff approached them, holstering his weapon. "That was quite a show, folks. You all right, Miss Lewis?" Virginia nodded, still processing what had happened. "Yes, Sheriff, thank you for your intervention." "Just doing my job," the lawman replied with a small smile. "Though I understand congratulations are in order. Mrs. Henderson mentioned there's a wedding tomorrow." Mitchell's arm tightened around Virginia's waist. "Yes, sir, if the minister's still willing after all this excitement." The sheriff chuckled. "Oh, I expect so. Reverend Phillips loves a good redemption story, and this one's better than most." He tipped his hat and moved away, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Virginia looked up at Mitchell, emotion overwhelming her. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "When Charlie said the Blackwells had found us," "Hush," Mitchell soothed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's over now, truly over. I couldn't let you face them alone, not for me." Mitchell's eyes shone with a mixture of exasperation and love. "Virginia Lewis, you are the most stubborn, brave woman I've ever known, and tomorrow you'll be my wife." The reality of it, that their future was secure, that the shadow that had hung over them was lifted, brought tears to Virginia's eyes. "I love you, Mitchell O'Malley." Mitchell kissed her then, not caring who might see. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let's go home, Virginia. We have a wedding to prepare for." They rode back to the valley side by side, Charlie following at a discreet distance. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and amber, a fitting end to a day that had begun in fear but concluded in triumph. The wedding the next day was everything Virginia could have hoped for: simple, heartfelt, and surrounded by the few people they had come to call friends. Sarah Henderson wept openly as Virginia and Mitchell exchanged vows beneath the old oak tree near the cabin, promising to love and protect each other for all their days. As Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell took Virginia's face in his hands with a tenderness that spoke volumes. "No regrets?" he asked softly, for her ears alone. Virginia smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Not a single one." Their kiss sealed more than just their marriage. It marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another, built on a foundation of respect, courage, and love that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. Later, as they danced beneath lantern light on the porch of their cabin, Virginia rested her head on Mitchell's shoulder. "Do you remember that day in Copper Creek?" she asked. "When you lifted me onto your horse and we rode away?" Mitchell's arms tightened around her. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met, standing up to Edmund Blackwell despite the consequences." Virginia laughed softly. "And I thought you were either a hero or a madman." "Which am I now?" Mitchell asked, spinning her gently. Virginia reached up to touch his beloved face. "Both, perhaps. My hero and my madman, for no sane person would have done what you did that day." Mitchell caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Best madness I ever gave into." As night fell fully over the valley that was now truly their home, Virginia Lewis O'Malley looked up at the star-filled sky and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For a rescue that had become a romance, for a chance encounter that had become a life, and for a man who had taught her that love, real love, was not about possession but about freedom. In the years that followed, their ranch prospered. Mitchell's horse breeding operation gained reputation throughout the region, and Virginia started a small school for neighboring children, putting her father's lessons to good use. They welcomed their first child, a daughter named Eleanor, a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a son they called James. The Blackwells kept their word. Edmund remained in California, eventually marrying there and losing himself in the management of his father's Western holdings. Horace Blackwell, perhaps seeking to make amends in his own way, recommended Mitchell's horses to his business associates, inadvertently helping the O'Malley Ranch build its reputation. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Mitchell presented Virginia with a deed to additional acreage adjoining their property land for their children's future. He explained, though Virginia suspected it was as much about ensuring she would never again feel the need to run. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" Virginia asked as they sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard that now boasted a swing and a small wooden horse Mitchell had carved. Mitchell considered the question, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, but I know this: my life began the day I saw you standing your ground in that dusty street." Virginia squeezed his hand, thinking of all they had built together. "Mine, too. Though I didn't know it then." "No regrets?" Mitchell asked, echoing his question from their wedding day. Virginia looked at their home, their children, and the man who had become the center of her world, the man who had lifted her onto his horse that fateful day and never looked back. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Not a single one."